Let's talk about Robert Crumb.
Oh, okay, sure.
These things have been said about Crumb. He's a genius, sexist, contrarian, innovator, visionary, racist, misogynist, pervert, pornographer, misanthrope, sex-obsessed, bearded stick insect, part Woody Allen, part Jack Nicholson, oddball, weirdo, and the ultimate wimp.
Yes.
True, right?
I can't, yeah. Some of them are true. A lot of them are true, even. Some of the work is certain things. He's something else. What was so fascinating about writing about him was that he either is or embodies or makes things that are all of those things. And how that all comes together and the weird mixture of it all is kind of the mystery that I wanted to at least try to describe, if not solve. He's all those parts of all those things.
How did you talk him into doing the biography?
I didn't even talk him into it. I think I caught him at the right time, and he was really relieved that he wouldn't have to explain comic books to me. He knew that I could talk about Little Lulu and Donald Duck and EC Comics and Matt and Harvey Kurtzman because he'd read enough of my stuff before that. And that was the big relief, that he wasn't going to have to sit around schooling me. And then he made those conditions that I write about in the beginning of the book, the fact that he said, okay, I'll do it. I'm not opposed to it, he said, but if you're going to do it, you have to cover the charges of racism and sexism. Not the bearded insect charge, but the rest. He really wanted me to tackle that and give it a fair airing. He wanted that to be out there. Otherwise, he felt like the book would be worthless, that it would be too easily dismissed. And Robert's savvy enough about his legacy to, look after that.
One of the things I read that he said was that he felt sorry for you.
No, how could he? Come on, I'm
and Art, why are you here?
I'm still trying to figure it out.
We don't know. He got on board the airplane and
stuck my thumb out.
Yeah.
No, it was so sad because Dan called me and as you all know, Art Crumb was going to be here and he bailed. And
this is true. I should have known. Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, it's true that the reason I'm here is I felt sorry for Dan.
Everybody feels sorry for me.
No, but the funny thing, it was such a delight to find out that, second place. Art Spiegelman, the creator of Mouse, the greatest graphic memoir of all time. I told Art, I realized it's not a masterpiece, it's a series of masterpieces, and it's such an amazing work. And I'd also like to give a shout out to one of my other favorite books by Art. Please pick up In the Shadow of No Towers. It's absolutely incredible. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah. It sort of ended my career at the New Yorker. I'd been doing covers and interior pages and even some essays. But after September 11th, it was still September 11th for me in December. I lived 10 blocks away. It was very intense. My daughter was going to school 2 blocks away, so it was like right next door. She saw people jumping out a window. The air was unbreathable, et cetera, and so on. So I just couldn't move on. And then when I went for a lecture outside the city, I was shocked because it was only like about 2 days of news for them, and it was over. So but when I was getting driven around to a campus to talk, they were saying things like, so you think that stuff was faked?
Oh, no.
So I just had to assimilate all this. So it was sometime in December where I started just taking notes and trying to figure out what had happened and what it meant to me. And I then submitted it to the New Yorker, and David said, well, we don't do things in series. This was a series of about a dozen pages, basically, finally. So we don't do that sort of thing. And then when I left, he goes over to Françoise, who's the art editor, and says...
Your wife?
My wife, yes. That part is so much a given, I didn't need to say it. So one of the first pages is like me sitting at a drawing table, kind of just trying to ignore everything by burying myself in old comics. The conceit was that the newspaper offices, Newspaper Row was only about 3 blocks from the World Trade Center, and I just figured all the old comic characters were disinterred by the disaster, and so all the strips were infected by the early comic strips told through that. On one side of me was bin Laden, and on the other side was George Bush. And bin Laden had a scimitar, and George Bush had a pop gun, and I'm saying equally threatened by both sides, and then I don't remember what came right after that. And then David just said, "What's the matter with your husband? How could he say that he's equally threatened?" And when I heard about it, I said, "Yes, it's true. Like, Bush is much more dangerous. He has a lot more money." So this was, I lived out my contract, but I needed to do this and not think about the New Yorker while I was doing it.
But Bush found the weapons of mass destruction. and created America's longest war. So
yeah, with help from Amy.
I killed the conversation there. and I really think that, we all know that these are weird times, and we should really, I think we should talk about politics in a very sophisticated, understanding, tolerant way. And so I would just like to sum up my feelings. Heil Hitler. That's my take. Killed the conversation again. Let's get back.
Those note cards.
Get back to Crumb. Okay. So
Fun guy.
So Robert, can you talk about Robert's family? His father was a Marine sergeant.
His father was a career Marine. He enlisted wanting to find adventure in the late 1930s, and he was sent over to China, where at the time it was fairly peaceful. It was just they were sort of guarding the international zone. And then war broke out, and he saw horrible things. Then came back to America and became an enlistment officer in Philadelphia, which is where he met Robert's mother, Bea. And Charles Crumb Sr. was this upright gentleman with the idea that maybe he'd be the next Jack London. He just needed to have life experience. And so after Pearl Harbor, he enlisted again, and he kept re-enlisting throughout World War II, and went to the Pacific Theater, then came back, and went back after Hiroshima, and was sort of very early on the ground to Japan after that, and remained in the Marines for quite some time, all the way until about 1956. But he loved the Marines. He loved the discipline. He loved the patriotism and the sort of fantasy of it all. But he was married to someone who needed stability and needed someone there to help her care for their 5 children. But in some ways, like Robert would later, he kept running away, and his way of running away was to run into combat, essentially, or the hope of combat. And he was perpetually disappointed that certainly the 3 boys, his 3 boys and 2 girls, that the 3 boys were these sort of like sissies. You know, they didn't want to go throw the ball around. They all wanted to sit in their rooms and read and draw comic books. You know, and I can relate to the boys.
I believe many people in the audience can relate.
I think probably most of, all of us on the stage and them. So the family life was really, really difficult because Robert's mother was mentally unstable from the time he was a very, very little kid. And his father was horribly traumatized by what he saw and did during World War II. So the kids never really had a chance. They had these parents that were at each other's throats and were ill. And then Robert's older brother Charles was ill from a very young age. And his younger brother Maxon was too. And so this was a house that was constantly in chaos. And the only thing they had were comic books, TV, sometimes movies, but movies that were rerun on television mostly. and the radio. But comic books were what really swept them away.
But it wasn't like superhero comics. It was funny animal comics,
It was funny.
right?
For them, the superhero comics were like jerks. Like Superman and Batman were, jerkies. What they liked Little Lulu, they liked Donald Duck, they liked Pogo. And to their credit, those are kind of the best comics of that time.
And Mad.
And Mad, then Mad a little later. Earlier, when they were really little kids, those funny animal comics that were so brilliantly drawn by guys who had all worked in animation at some point or another and knew how to tell incredibly sophisticated and compelling stories that were beautifully structured. Those are just great comics. But then when Robert discovers Mad in the mid-50s, it was just like a light bulb went off, and suddenly, along with realizing that maybe Catholicism wasn't a great idea and that his parents were really messed up, Mad sort of confirmed that the whole veneer, the whole surface around him was corrupt, and that he had to get underneath it, essentially. And also, something you've talked about a bit is that Mad, at least not for you, but for Robert, Mad was his first taste of ethnic humor. It was a Jewish humor, essentially, and Robert was white as white can be. And so this was sort of an anarchic New York sensibility, New York Jewish sensibility coming through, reaching all across the country and upsetting everybody.
What was amazing to me was all the cartoonists in that underground comics scene were marked by the same things, and sometimes as specifically as there's one issue of Mad. I saw it when it was reprinted in a paperback, and it was about this high with a lot of other covers from Mad that were anthologized into that paperback, and I couldn't get my eyes off it. It was just so strong. I'd never seen anything quite like it. And then later
Which one? Which cover?
Oh, okay. It's a cover that looks like Life magazine, which was
Yes.
basically CNN and every other establishment news thing writ large.
Yeah.
And it had a very specific design. And so this was a cover that had a photographic background that was taken out of the back window of the EC offices. And in the foreground was the most grotesque woman anybody had ever drawn by a person named Basil Wolverton, who won the ugliest girl contest.
That's right, Lena the Hyena.
Lena the Hyena. Like Will Abner had a contest of the most ugly woman that was submitted would be the one who gets to marry Lil Abner during the Sadie Hawkins Day race. But it was so frightening looking and so strange that even at that size, it marked me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't leave the store. I was like 5 years old. I was looking at the spinner rack. My mother just wanted to go on to the next chore from the drugstore, and I wouldn't let her go unless I had it. I was not usually that adamant, but I'm not leaving. If the cover's
Wait,
staying,
and you're not
staying
talking
with
about
that.
the actual comic. You're talking about a thumbnail illustration on the cover of the paperback book.
Yeah, that had about 10 covers on it.
Right.
But that one was just...
So that's so funny, because when Robert saw that cover, it was the comic book itself on the newsstand, and he was too scared to bring it home. It freaked him out so bad. Like, he knew that it was so rude and so messed up that he couldn't bring it home. And he didn't buy Mad. He didn't own a copy of Mad for another few years. It was so jarring to him.
Well, after I got that paperback, I started getting Mad and eventually even a subscription for many years. Because for me, my parents just didn't understand America at all. And this seemed like the Rosetta Stone to understand America.
Right. So it was like a way of understanding America for you.
In fact, I thought MAD was an acronym for Mom and Dad.
Are you serious? That's good. And by the time I was growing up, I liked Cracked. That was my jam.
Really?
I was really into Cracked, yeah.
I was into all of them. Frenzy, Frantic, Loco.
Well, but when I was growing up, we only had Mad and Cracked. It was after the fall. Yeah.
But
you're looking at me like I'm crazy for liking Cracked.
No,
Cracked,
I liked
found
Cracked.
Mad was too sophisticated for me when I was a kid. Cracked felt like more my level.
It was more attainable. You could even think of working there or something. The other people were gods.
Yeah.
But the main thing about it was that it affected so many people. Peter Saul, the painter,
Oh yeah.
saw a cover, and when he was living in France without money, he couldn't buy it, but he just kept staring at this cover.
right.
So what it was a cover that was like taking down authority, right? It was like, it said, most beautiful girl in the world, and then there was this absolutely grotesque thing. You have the cover here somewhere to show, right?
No.
We didn't bring the slides after all? Oh, okay. But she had like these weird pockmarked gums, hair that was like spaghetti, nostrils that went on forever,
Oh, yeah.
And so on. And
I think Mad 11. Is it Mad number 11?
that's right.
Yeah.
And in fact,
You can
Glenn
Google
Head
it.
was here, I think.
Yes,
right?
someone
he
we
owns
know.
the original.
Yeah, don't tell them who it is.
Oh. Sorry, Glenn. But it's
one of the
a remarkable
great
thing because what it
artworks.
did was it subverted reality. It was basically saying the whole world, the whole adult world is lying to you, kid. And we're part of the adult world, so good luck.
So don't even trust us.
Don't trust
Yeah,
anything. So one cover just had the word think on the
Yeah.
cover. So it was really
Brilliantly.
trying to tell you as overtly as possible. They didn't have to figure out this world.
And that was
Were you aware of the artists or Harvey Kurtzman? Were you aware
Well,
of Harvey Kurtzman?
Yeah, a little bit later than the artist,
Harvey
because the
Kurtzman,
artist
who
signed all the words.
wrote Mad.
Yeah, I got first to see Elderwood and Davis because they signed each of their stories, and then I got into the styles because they had their own unique styles, but they were the god kings of what.
Will Elder, Wally Wood, and Jack Davis, yeah, great cartoonists, unbelievable. I have a Jack Davis story. So many years after the 1950s, the National Cartoonist Society, somebody from the National Cartoonist Society called me up and said, we'd like you to come to the Rubin Awards in Boca Raton, Florida, and we'd really like you to come. And I said, well, thanks, but no thanks. And they said, you're nominated for the Rubin Award. And I said, well, okay, well, that's not going to happen. And the Rubin Award is the big award they give out every year. And the guy said, well, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you won. Got to keep it a secret. So I said, who else is nominated? And they said, Jack Davis. I'm like, oh, no, Jack Davis should win. He goes, you won, you should come. So I flew to Boca Raton, and I'm sitting next to Jack Davis at the award ceremony, and Jack is at the end of his career, and he turns to me, he says, and he's crying. He goes, I really hope I win.
Jesus.
God. And I go, I know I won. They told me. And I think he should win, but I won. And so I'm just trying to be nice. And they go, and the winner is Jack Davis. What? Talk about mixed feelings. So actually, he should have won, and I'm glad he did win.
And have you won since?
What? I did win later. I think they felt, because I whined about it, like on stage right now. So they had to give it
They
to me.
felt sorry for you.
And by the way, I said, is this for life in hell? And they said, no.
Wow, they wouldn't even humor you.
Yeah. Anyway, Jack Davis is one of the greats.
Great artist.
Yeah.
But
He influenced Crumb along with Bill Elder and Wally Wood too, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Crumb really studied all those guys intensively. Davis for the cross-hatching, which shows up in so much of Crumb's work, that really, really intense sense of space that you get from cross-hatching. Elder and the amount of like volume and those
fat.
figures, and chicken fat, exactly. Which chicken fat, for those of you who are not Jewish or otherwise Yiddish inclined, all the other stuff in the panels.
all that little background stuff that makes
Yeah.
you go back and look at stuff again.
Schmaltz. Yes. Yeah, and Wally Wood, it's funny, he got into Wally Wood later, which is funny. In the 1980s, Crumb started really, really studying Wally Wood to get a feel for how to do noir styling. So like the Jelly Roll Morden story that he
When he
did.
started using a brush.
When he started using
Yeah.
a brush for Raw, the Philip K. Dick story for Weirdo, all those, not all, but some of those biographical stories were really informed by his intense study of Wally Wood and a guy named Jay Disbrow, who was a sort of second or third tier horror and crime guy, and all of whom, both Wood and Disbrow, were just obsessed with detail and inky blacks, so that you sort of go into a page and almost fall into it because it was so deep with the ink. Yeah, I mean, that stuff
But when you
stayed
talk
with
about
Crumb.
Kurtzman, that was like 4 years later or so where I got to understand who he was. And at that point, he became my role model. It's all I wanted to do is understand what he did. Because he wrote them all. He drew some of it, but he was very slow at drawing, so I took that as a model. I draw incredibly slow.
Yeah.
But also, he kind of invented a syntax for how comic book panels should be broken down. You know, like D.W. Griffith gave you most of what you need to know about making movies. The cuts, the fades, all of that language was from him. Comics never had one person who sort of did that much articulation. But for Kurtzman, it was like every box had to be either, well, it always was 3 tiers, and it was either one long box, 2, 3, or 4, and each page was a thought, like a sentence or a paragraph, like that went on the page. So it gave a real structure to like how one would write and make something. That became really important for me. And he drew like a god. It was beautiful drawing.
Right. Did Crumb know those people? Did he ever get to know them?
I'm not sure. He certainly knew Harvey.
Well, you would know.
Yeah, he knew Harvey well.
Yeah, he knew Harvey. I mean, you were both sort of the children of Kurtzman. Kurtzman took Crumb under his wing So Kurtzman had a bunch of things. He left Mad. He starts a magazine called Humbug that Robert was obsessed with as a kid, and that was Robert's.
Even worse, he started a magazine called Trump before Trump was invented.
Then Trump, funded by Hugh Hefner.
Which lasted, what, 2 issues?
2 great issues.
Yeah. Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But he said I should interrupt.
Yeah, you are. You're supposed to interrupt.
Okay.
Come on, get in there.
Basically, I got to talk to Hefner on the phone once when I was doing a book about another great cartoonist, Jack Cole. And in talking to him about Trump, he says, you know, I gave him an unlimited budget and he surpassed it.
Yeah, Kurtzman.
I have a Hugh Hefner story.
Uh-oh.
So I was shopping at Heidi Ho Comics. Meltdown Comics. And Meltdown Comics on Sunset Boulevard. And right across the street was Butterfield's auction house. And a guy came running in and said, anybody here know anything about Playboy? Yeah, I do. And the reason I knew about Playboy is because my father was in advertising, and we grew up with every general interest magazine in the country. And my job was to stack them in the basement. So I stacked everything from Life, Look, Coronet, to Jet, Ebony, and we got everything. Anyway, and also Playboy, which was my favorite. And so I went over there, and everyone in the auction house was younger than me by at least 30 years, and they did not know what they were looking at. And I said, well, that's an illustration by so-and-so, and it was all original art, and
oh my God.
And also transparencies of foldouts with Hugh Hefner's not Photoshop, what do you call it? Just retouching.
Retouching
notes.
Yeah.
Because it turns out women, even in Playboy, weren't perfect.
That's right.
So they had to make it better. Anyway, somebody said, is Hef here? And the guard said, no, Mr. Hefner is not here. And they said, do you want to come backstage and meet Mr. Hefner? So I went back, and he was dressed like the cliche, like in the
silk robe. Yeah.
And there were Playboy bunnies, and I was introduced to him, and he said, I really like The Simpsons, but I never know when it's on. I said, it's on 24 hours a day. Anyway, so that's my Hugh Hefner story.
Crumb managed to really piss off Hefner in Chicago in the early 1970s. He was taken, actually, I think he went with somebody who was in the audience here tonight, Jane, if you're out there. I mean, Jane, I wish, yeah. Anyway, Jane could tell the story. He was taken to the Playboy Mansion because they were courting him. They wanted to publish Crumb, and he was refusing. After having begged them to publish him when he was broke in 1966, a handful of years later, he's back in Chicago, and he goes and he sits down at the piano, Robert, and he begins playing and sort of belting out old-time dance music. And as he told the story, all the bunnies gathered around, and it was sort of this wholesome moment of Robert, who was quite charismatic in his way, and really entertaining everybody. And later he found out that Hefner was furious that Crumb was stealing his thunder, that mansion.
Wow.
No, I only got to see I only got to see Playboy when I heard that he was doing Little Annie Fanny, which wasn't the best thing
This is
he
Kurtzman.
ever did, Kurtzman.
Yeah.
But it was the most plushly painted comic ever made up to that point, with the artists we were just mentioning all collaborating on the pictures. And I needed it. The same way I wouldn't go out of the drugstore without that Mad.
Wait, you liked Little Annie Fanny?
No, I didn't know what it was. I just saw some panels of it when it was passing by.
Little Annie
First few
Fanny is
issues,
the
it's
worst
terrible.
thing
I agree.
ever.
It's
but
not a good-
I agree.
yeah.
It's overdone and
Playboy is bad, but Little Annie Fanny was below that.
I agree. But like I'd never seen anything
Poor
like
Chris.
it. Now with reproduction different than it was back in 1964, like
That'll
fully
show 'em.
painted comics. But the thing was that Kurtzman understood that he was making a deal with the devil, because the good part of what's in Little Annie Fanny was in this magazine he did called Help about Goodman Beaver.
Right.
And it had the satire aspect of everything, really good, in black and white, very, very densely drawn. And Hefner really liked it because he'd wanted to be a cartoonist, was sort of a cartoonist. And he wanted something like that for Playboy. But what he wanted was, instead of Goodman Beaver, let's make it a sexy girl. And Kurtzman,
It's Candide with a sexy girl, basically.
Yeah. And so it was a parody of Little Orphan Annie in some way, but it was mainly about a different topic each issue, but it would be some topic that could be satirized, except it was all about sex, so it kept moving away from whatever was being satirized. And Kurtzman said very wistfully, I thought it was really smart, he said, Hefner's a romantic and I'm a realist. You can't work together. It doesn't work. Wow. Sad. But what I did was I needed it. So I mentioned to my parents, I need Playboy. And again, fortunately, they weren't very acclimated to America. So we'll get you a subscription, honey.
How old were you?
About 12, 13. And I really was interested in it at the time. I understand how shitty it is now, but at the time it looked like nothing else, and that was interesting to me. The only mistake I made was I began putting the pinups up in my bedroom. And that was when my parents decided to stop the subscription. My father took me aside and said, your mother's embarrassed to come in here and clean. And I said, it's okay, I don't need it clean. But it was the end of that subscription.
So let's get back from Playboy to funny animal comics.
Yes, good. Yeah, more wholesome.
So back in the 50s,
Yes.
Charles, Robert's older brother, he was the
Charles was the first one who was fully obsessed with comics and obsessed with making his own comics. So he started his own company in the family called Animal Town Comics, and basically started having his siblings draw monthly comics, full-length monthly comics that would be, with a color cover and advertising on the back, with full stories inside, that they would, hand around in school and, show to their classmates. But this was like as though it was a job.
Did they print them?
No, they were just one-offs. So,
So these are original art that they're
it was
handing.
all original art,
Wow.
handing around. And Charles drove Robert like a real publisher. So Robert had to produce 20, 30 pages a month. Otherwise his brother would be very disappointed.
What was their difference in ages?
They were, 2 years apart?
With Charles being older.
Yeah, Charles was 2 years older. That's it. But for whatever reason, Charles Charles always at least seemed to Robert like a much worldlier person while they were kids. Like an older sibling does, but Charles also put on airs of being worldlier. He sort of pretended to be more spiritual, smarter, more literate, a better artist. Everything was better, better, better.
And yet, the stuff they were doing was Alligator and his nephew Nicky, and Chicky Chick, Mopsy and Flopsy,
A classic, yeah.
Fuzzy the Bunny, Blackie Crow.
I do like Fuzzy the Bunny, yeah.
Diffie and Shacktown, featuring
Diffie and Shacktown is really good, yeah. They redid it later.
Now wait a second, so you saw these?
I read them, yeah.
They haven't been reprinted?
No, they've not been reprinted. Robert has a good-sized stack of them that he retrieved when Charles died. No, they've never been reprinted because they were done when these guys were like, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. They wouldn't, but they're fascinating documents, yeah. And they hold up kind of like as though you're reading, not as good as this, of course, but like John Stanley's breakdowns for Little Lulu, like stick figure comics. But the rhythms are there, and the dialogue is there. I mean, so much so that in the 70s, Robert did cover versions of a couple of them.
Right. And you, in your book, you talk about Charles did 80 or 90 issues of Chuck Crumb's Funny Friends.
Yeah, that's true.
That's amazing.
I know. And not only did he do 80 or 90 issues, but then later on wrote a memoir about it when he was just like 16 or 17, sort of recounting the illustrious Crumb publishing empire. I mean, these guys were myth-making from the time they were so young, and in a really serious, thoroughgoing way. There was a checklist of all the comics. They redrew the covers inside of notebooks, so they're sort of narrating for a fantasy audience who might want to know this history, and I did. I wanted to know the history. They were just waiting.
But all the kids in the family were doing comics, right? The sisters were too.
The sisters, Carol didn't do much. Sandra did some. Maxon did some, but it was mostly, it was really Charles and Robert that were doing the bulk of it, and Robert more than anyone.
The miracle is like, you've had this once-in-a-lifetime chance to do a biography where the person you're limning, writing about, gave you not only carte blanche, he insisted that you cover it warts and all, and he has the most incredible documentation of his life. He has diaries going back from when he was a little kid, almost daily, right? Until now, so
it's a lot.
Diaries.
Yeah.
And then the writings in his notebooks, which are very intimate as well. Yeah. And then willing to ask me anything and I'll tell you kind of an approach. It's going to be hard to find another subject like that.
That's true. I'm retiring tonight. This is it. I'm done. It was good, but also a little nuts because I would go over to France and spend time in the archive because it's all in his home. And at a certain, pretty early on, I realized that I'd have to live there for months to get through it all. So then I was spending days just photographing everything in the archive and then bringing it all back home and looking at it all on screen. And it was thousands and thousands of pages that I had to deal with. And I think partly Robert, sometimes I thought he was sort of purposefully torturing me with all this material. Like, it was so much. Mm-hmm. But it was also because I loved the work so much and he was so willing, it was fun a lot of the time.
Fun, question mark?
Fun in the sense that, oh my God, I'm discovering all this new stuff about somebody I've been fascinated by for decades. But also, oh my God, I'm never going to get through all of this. I have to start writing at some point, and that was a little nuts. That made me feel crazy.
Should we show some of the? You want to do some?
Oh yeah, we can go through. Let's go to the first slide. These are greeting cards. These were some of the first things that people saw of Robert's work that were not, following along Help magazine. Greeting cards for American Greetings. We can go to the next one. Life Among the Constipated from 1967. This was a strip that was published on the back cover of Yarrow Stocks #2, which was a Philadelphia tabloid. And this was one of the things that kind of announced Robert's presence in the counterculture. It was this strip that got reprinted in a lot of underground papers in rapid succession, starting in like the fall of '67. So suddenly he was in the East Village Other in New York, but also I think the LA Free Press and Vancouver, the Berkeley Barb. He just was across the country because of the sort of the underground press syndicate. And
The underground press syndicate, if you remember, you could print anything you wanted from any
for
of the
free.
papers. Yes.
In exchange for subscriptions.
Right.
Yeah, and so that meant that he could be national without even knowing he was national. Suddenly it was just everywhere. It was kind of wild that you could be so well known without ever even trying.
Well, Life Among the Constipated and another strip he did called White Man was
Oh yeah,
really
we could
setting
go
up.
to
Oh, is that
Well,
it?
that's sort of jump. Let's stay on this one.
okay.
Okay, so this comic, Zap Comics #1, this is the comic that blew my mind in, what was it, 1968.
1968.
And I didn't see the actual comic. I saw it in a pseudo-hip magazine called EYE magazine. And in each issue of I magazine, it was like the size of Saturday Evening Post, there was a poster, and on the back of the poster was something called the Electric Last Minute, which was all little news articles. And they printed a thumbnail illustration, a photograph of this cover. And so I saw it as a tiny little, like a stamp. And that image, and then it said Zap Comics are Squinky Comics.
Yep.
What is Squinky, right? And it just was a whole world. And later I became friends with the artist Gary Panter, and he had the exact same experience as me. That magazine, that back of the poster, little thumbnail thing. There's something about that cover that just blows my mind. And I think one of the amazing things too is this is an indication also, in addition to the art and this, weird throwback to the 1930s and, old cartoons and old comics, the lettering is amazing. I mean, Crumb's lettering and Crumb's design sense and graphic sense is just absolutely top notch. And it's just amazing. I ran into Victor Moscoso at one point. Later, Victor Moscoso was a cartoonist, was in Zap later.
And was a great, great poster artist at the same time.
And he said, I have the original art
That's right.
of that. And he said, do you want to buy it? I said, yes. I said, how much? He said, $200,000. I said, no. And then later, when I met Crumb, I said, hey, Victor Moscoso has your art. Has art for Zap #1. And he said, how much does he want for it? And I said, $200,000. He said, not worth it.
Yeah. That sounds right. Absolutely. Because Robert never values the original art at all. It's sort of meaningless to him.
No, that's
All about the printed object.
But why would one illustration be so? There was nothing like it at the moment.
What
It
it
changed
is
everything.
this was the return of the repressed. Like at that time when this was coming out, the ideal for being a cartoonist would be like to be either like Saul Steinberg or Charles Schulz. It was all like less is more had taken
Jules
over
Pfeiffer.
everything. Pfeiffer as well. It was all about minimalist cartooning. And this stuff was never seen anywhere anymore. Like everything had been cleaned up. So to have that entire world show up again from out of nowhere had a very big impact. And it actually impacted a lot of, to me it became really interesting. Like when I was looking for people, I did a magazine called Raw that was with Françoise.
Yeah.
And when we did this thing, I was in Europe going to comic shops there for the first time and like getting really excited about the different people whose work we were seeing. And we were trying to do something that wasn't underground comics. That was like underground comics were dying and we knew we'd never get that distributed, but a large size magazine like Wet or Interview, people would slow down for because it was a new wave magazine. So we were looking for artists that we might be able to use, and the idea was we'd meet them and see what they actually did. And what was amazing was these artists were not like each other, but when you started going over their sketchbooks and their earlier work, they all were copying Crumb. There was always Keep on Truckin' and certain other bits of cross-hatching that looked like Robert's. But it was people like, I don't know if you'll know the names, most of you, but Jacques Tardy is one of the most well-known adventure comics artists in France. And then Jos Swart is one of the most decorative cartoonists who also had a retro look to it. But when you look back early enough, his stuff is also imitating Crumb. Then an artist named Mariscal, who was also big as a kind of designer for Memphis, making furniture as well as cartoons. The cartoons were, he was the only person who wasn't depressed in Raw.
Yeah, it was
It was
fun.
exuberant drawings, very quick and easy. Had a little bit of Steinberg in them, but you look through a sketchbook and there's the Crumb period. And it's like, Crumb was like, I think it's in your book, I said like, he was like the monolith in 2001. Like you couldn't become civilized, you couldn't become a person unless you managed to get through that monolith. So you had to assimilate and absorb his work before doing anything else. And so the artists that were influenced by Crumb, as well as all the underground cartoonists who were around his age or a little bit younger, he was also a big influence on Moebius, you know his work?
Yeah.
So Moebius had been drawing this very well done Western comics in a very different style under the name Giraud, which was his name, Jacques Giraud. Jean-Luc?
Jean Giraud.
Jean Giraud, okay. Anyway, it was very well done, but kind of boring. Beautifully drawn. But then when he saw the Crumb stuff, everything changed. He changed his name, and he changed the way he drew, and it was all done with very careful cross-hatching. And then looking at Steinberg's stuff, and Steinberg also, these are people a generation or more older than Crumb, but he opened the floodgates with this Return of the Repressed, so that Steinberg began drawing funny Crumb-like cars and women with legs bigger than a log, you know, like very, like much more streamlined drawing, but with Crumb-shaped women. So
yeah, I mean, it's funny. Also, almost everyone I interviewed who saw that cover on the stands, like Bill Griffith, for example, and Jay Lynch was quoted about this as well. Like everybody talked about how it was something that seemed completely familiar but utterly foreign at the same time. It was this language that everybody was familiar with because it had shades of Disney, it had shades of sort of Depression era graphics, Fleischer Brothers, but put to use in a clearly psychedelic way. And as Victor said, when I talked to him, like instead of the comics code shield there, it says approved by it's like the sky writer, the writers in the sky. You know, so it's this, everything is sort of flickering psychedelic and new, but you could grasp it because it was also, like you said, Matt, like perfectly crafted. The lettering is beautiful. It doesn't seem like this could be done by one person. It should be done by like a graphics guy and a draftsman, but it's all one person doing everything at an incredibly high level and publishing it himself. You know, it was essentially a self-published.
I got to see that before it was published. Like
tell us about meeting Crumb.
Because you met him in what must have been the fall of '67.
Yeah. So I was going out for the first time to San Francisco.
How'd you get there?
Volkswagen with 3 friends.
From Manhattan?
From upstate New York.
Okay.
Drove across country.
Do you remember the trip?
Do I remember? Yeah, well, partially. I mean, it was the 60s.
Yeah. Do you remember the 3 friends?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm still in touch with one of them, very close friend.
Huh.
But the thing was, I went because there was this recruiting poster, an issue of Life magazine that said, come to San Francisco and wear a flower in your hair. So I was a hippie to be.
Yeah.
Changing over from beatnik to something else. And when this man named Woody Gelman knew that I was going to San Francisco, he said, you know, you should look up this guy. He's a really good cartoonist named Robert Crumb. He worked here for a while, a little bit before we got you in here. And I had seen, I guess, a couple of things by him around that time, right? Like, when did he do the Help stuff? Was that later?
You would have seen the Help material like a few years before, but also Woody. So Woody Gelman was the art director of Topps Bubblegum, where Crumb worked in 1965 and into early '66, and where Art worked
66.
in '66.
Started then and went on for
and then
45
on.
years.
I mean, doing Wacky Packages and then Garbage Pail Kids and many other things.
But
But
Woody was an important figure in the sense
An
that
amazing eye.
He was collecting all of the great stuff in comics, like old Sunday pages of Little Nemo, and nobody knew what Little Nemo was at all.
His was the first Little Nemo reprint book. Yeah.
And then eventually more and more elaborate ones, but he collected all of the pages one way or another, the printed work, and he had a great eye. He wasn't a great cartoonist, although he did a couple of comic book illustrations as well, then before he became a creative director of Topps. And the way Crumb got there was Crumb had come to New York to work for Harvey Kurtzman, except he got there just in time for the magazine to decide it couldn't continue.
Yeah, the way he tells it is he showed up for work. He moved from Cleveland to New York, got an apartment on the Upper East Side, took the subway down to help in Midtown on a Monday morning, and Kurtzman said, "Oh no, we've closed." So
I don't know the chronology, but he did send him to Bulgaria, and he did.
That was the year before.
Yeah, so that's I guess some of the first things I saw by him. Those were very good, but what Woody got. Well, just to finish the more general part of it, he understood that history really well of comics. He did comics himself, and he was a connoisseur of people's talents and nurtured it wherever he was. And Harvey Kurtzman, when he was folding up, didn't know what to do with Robert. So he called up Woody saying, "Can you hire him at Topps or something? He has no money. He just landed on my doorstep."
Yeah.
So he worked there for about 6 months, and then a few months after that, I started working there. And he and Crumb and Woody developed a correspondence, and Crumb would send him things like called Fug or Head.
Fug, he showed.
Yeah, so he was trying to make Zap, Avant la Lettre, and was showing that to Woody, and Woody was really interested in it and showing it to me. And I liked that stuff, but it wasn't an epiphany for me. He was just a very good comics artist. And oddly enough, I go up to help around the same time just to see the offices, because my high school of art and design was a few blocks away from where Help's offices were at the time. And I go up there and there's nothing there. They're just closing up shop. There's garbage cans, there's like a couple of desks left. And the only person there was Terry Gilliam. And Terry Gilliam is very nice to me. We're talking, and he was a very good cartoonist, worked in Help magazine himself as well as being an editor. And he opens a drawer, and there's some pages of doodles by Crumb. And he says, more of this stuff. Do you want some? And stupidly, no.
Well, you were a connoisseur.
I can't explain it. He was very, very, very good, and I admired everything I saw. But what really changed it was when I got out to San Francisco, I was seeing something I had never seen before. It was like, it hit me as hard as that Mad cover.
Well, you saw the original art in Robert's flat, right?
Yeah.
On Oak Street in San Francisco.
Was it Oak Street? It was right on the Panhandle?
Yeah, it was Oak Street,
Yeah. So I went there just because Woody had sent me to meet him, and I was interested. But I didn't know that part of him. I knew the part that did greeting cards, things like that. I get there, this woman answers the door. I assumed it was his mother. She was very large and just didn't look anywhere near his age. So I just assumed that, and she treated it that way. "Oh, Robert, somebody's here to see you," but not like a part of a dynamic.
Right.
So I go in this area of the apartment that has like about 20 or 30 cathedral radios that he hand-painted.
Yeah. You saw those?
Yeah.
No, they're all gone.
Oh man, beautiful. Every knob was a different color. You know? And then we're talking about this stuff, and he shows me these pages. I'm doing this comic book, but I sent it. I sent the issue I did off to England, and the guy won't answer my mail anymore. It turns out from your book I learned he was in India.
He sent it off to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And then he went to India.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So Robert didn't know what to do about this. There was no book anymore, so he was starting another issue. So I didn't see the stuff that became Zap Zero. I saw Zap 1 while he was
Yeah.
Yeah. And that just absolutely blew me away, because that was one of those, I've never seen anything like this before. Because it was like this, but really charged, more than even the Zap cover. Like the whole feeling of it was like, had an intensity and a psychedelic quality that wasn't with Paisleys or anything, but you know, it was definitely there. And it shocked me, and it was exciting. And very affable. We talked for a while, and I realized I'm going to have to change my life, because I wanted to grow up and become the avatar of comics. I just wanted to do that.
Yeah.
You know, like be an important comics artist. I saw his work and I went, okay, it's no contest. So I said, I was telling him all the things I thought should be done in comics, and rapid fired, because I wasn't going to do it anymore. I was checking out.
You were trying to pass it all
It's
on.
all your problem now.
Yeah.
And then what I did was I just went out to the Panhandle, wandered into the park, and took LSD, figuring I'm going to become the Buddha instead.
Wait, say the LSD?
Yeah.
What about it?
Oh, just that I had
Oh,
asked...
I know, because I have a theory about LSD being an inspiration for some of the best artists of the 1960s.
Yeah, it was important to transgress in that direction.
And Crumb used LSD?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
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 But I mean, that was the drug of choice. It wasn't like, oh, we'll get some mushrooms this week and we'll get some psilocybin next week and some whatever. LSD was the rage.
I'm kind of jealous because it was around, but I just took mushrooms, and that was on a pepperoni pizza.
Yeah, I mean, Rob.
That's a professional joke.
That was good.
But it was very vivid to me that day, like deciding I'm not going to be a cartoonist, I'm just going to become...
Did you have a good trip in the park?
Oh, it was an amazing trip.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things I still remember. I don't remember much, but I remember these two things. One was these French people came over, and I was just shantying up the gazoo, you know?
Yeah.
Shanty. And they're coming over and looking at me like as if I was just an object, you know? They're tourists in San Francisco, and they say, he's fake. He's phony. He's faking it. And then the woman who was with him said, no, he's not. Look, he's just there doing that. So I was just this object, and they moved on. And then I'm sitting alone, continuing to do this chanting, and all of a sudden, this giant turtle comes running as fast as a turtle can run, right at me. And I guess that's what LSD was for, you know, I didn't know. But it was real. The guy who had the turtle said, like, you know, I felt your vibes from across the park, so I just let him go and he came running to you.
Oh, that's nice.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. And then I went home, hung out, and crashed there for a couple of days. So it was a nice transition from wanting to be God King of Comics to figuring, okay, I'll be Buddha.
Yeah.
6 months later, I was in a mental hospital.
That's a longer story.
That's another story.
Wow.
Now,
You want to show Zap number 0?
yeah, let's go to the next slide. Okay, that's White Man from Zap 1. We can go to which was sort of roughly based on or related to Robert's father. Poor old white man. Let's go to the next slide.
But White Men and Life Among the Constipated, or whatever it's called,
Yeah.
they were the same thing. It was the separation of straight people and the freaks.
Absolutely.
And that created a real resonance and made him the king of the hippies, but he wasn't a hippie at all.
No, he was an outsider even amongst the hippies.
Yeah, but like for the people who liked being hippies, this was like an affirmation that there's another culture, another way of living.
Yeah, and then they got annoyed when he started making fun of them too, immediately. Immediately making fun of them, yes.
When did the cover of the Big Brother and the Holding Company album Cheap
That
Price
came
happen?
that came out in August 1968, 6 months after Zap 1, and a few months before this cover. So yeah, by the end of 68, he's done a couple issues of, 3 issues of Zap, the Big Brother Company, Head Comics, and a lot of stuff in underground newspapers. And he's everywhere internationally. It shows up in France for the first time by the end of the year. England, earlier than that even. It's quite something, yeah.
And that's when he became famous. That changed his life.
That is when he became famous. And when he shows up in New York, he was pretty famous around California by mid-68. But when he shows up in New York in October of 68, he's pretty famous. There's a photographer following him around sometimes, and he's giving interviews. He's had a Viking published Head Comics. It was a mainstream publisher publishing that stuff, and he was 25 years old, and had basically changed the entire medium, and gone from underground to mainstream in 6 months. So yeah, it would have turned anybody's head around a bit, yeah.
Did you go through a phase where you were trying to draw like Crumb?
Of course.
Do you still have that stuff?
A couple of sketchbooks. I'm not like Crumb. I don't have a good archive of my own work, but yeah.
Because it seems like every cartoonist did.
That's what I was saying.
As you said.
That's what I was
You
trying to
did.
say.
I did.
I've
I went
seen that
for a little bit,
Yeah.
and and virtually everybody.
Oh yeah, Charles. Well, yeah.
But I was moving
Who?
toward
Charles Burns did.
Charles Burns
I mean, yeah.
Everybody.
Everybody did. Everybody did.
Gary.
And then you
Gary
realized you
did,
couldn't
yeah.
do it any good, so you gave it up.
I mean, what were your comics like after you saw Crumb for the first time?
I tried to do imitations of Zap,
Yeah.
People saying silly, non sequitur things, because again, I wasn't taking LSD.
Right.
I was faking it.
You were faking the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Go to the next slide.
it was hugely important. So let's move ahead a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Can we talk about stories of encounters with Crumb? Because I have one.
Matt, go ahead.
Robert came to Los Angeles, and God, I can't remember the year.
Mid 80s.
Mid 80s.
Well, because
And
Gary was still living here, so.
Gary Panter was here. Gary and I were hanging out,
Four,
and the photographer, I believe it was Greg Gannon.
Yep.
He got us together, and we went out to lunch, and we were driving down Hollywood Boulevard. Gary Panter, Greg driving, and me, and we drove past the Church of Scientology, and Crumb said, "Stop the car! Stop the car!" By the way, this was December. And so, although it was very warm out, there was a big Christmas display at the Church of Scientology. So there was Santa Claus and fake reindeer and fake snow. And Crumb said, "Stop the car." And he got out in his long overcoat and he darted across Hollywood Boulevard. And he said, "Take my picture, take my picture." And then he held out a penny over the little contribution box and made his posture into a question mark. And I'll never forget that moment. And you said that photo was printed.
I think that's in the book of Weirdo.
It might be in the book of Weirdo.
I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that was an amazing thing. Then we went over to Gary's house, and I think Robert was very shocked, or he didn't understand Gary's work at all, because Gary was so both a combination of complete virtuoso and completely crazy and wild.
Yeah.
So he drew like he couldn't draw, but he obviously could really, really draw. And in fact, I talked to Gary today, and because I said I'm going to do this thing, and I said, "Well, what do you think of Crumb?" And he said that Zap number 1, he said that restated the 20th century in cartoon form. That was his take on it. And he talked about Crumb being influenced by Gene Ahern, the Nutt Brothers,
Sure.
Snuffy Smith, Barney Google, Major Hoople. And he quoted something, and I don't know what it's from, so he said that you would know what this meant. Naj, Naj,
Oh, of
Kabosh.
course.
What is that?
It's the Nut Brothers.
From Gene Ahern, the Nut
Gene-
Brothers.
Gene Ahern had
Is
a-
it nonsense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It
there
was
was,
what the little hitchhiker who looked like Mr. Natural would say while he was hitchhiking.
yeah, Gene Ahern was like a mid-century cartoonist who really did smoke pot. I mean, it was clear in those, it was a popular cartoonist, but he had something called the Squirrel Cage, Nut Brothers, and then the straight strip, which was it Our Rooming House?
Yeah, it was Major Hoople.
Major
but the
Hoople,
thing that was
yeah.
so amazing about that, Major Hoople was the popular strip of a sort. It was mainly one panel about this blowhard braggart in a boarding house, and balloons longer than the essays and articles around it.
Incredibly.
But it was very like blue collar, smelled of cabbage,
Yeah.
and had bare light bulbs, pretty much. And that was a very important zone for Robert. Even that first time we met him, we were both talking about L.Z. Seeger.
Oh, of course.
Because
yeah.
when I was saying it was like Peanuts had taken over, it's like what it took over from was what I was just describing. This kind of very low life, lower middle class approach. With
Scratchier.
Yeah, but to have Major Hoople down in the bottom 2/3 of the page and then a little topper strip was just absolutely intentionally surreal.
Yep.
With vaudeville-like gags that were kind of non sequiturs at the same time, and Nav Shmaz Kapap always being sort of a catchword for that. And what I only found out in the last X number of years through the internet, making friends with a guy named Paul Toomey, who knows his screwball comics really well, did a book on it. Evidently, that top strip, when it changed its title from what was it called?
Squirrel Cage to Nut Brothers, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think the Squirrel Cage was the second one.
Okay.
And the Squirrel Cage was a continuing comic strip, but nobody knew it because not every paper carried it that way. And it's insanely interesting. It's a great strip.
There's still a lot.
My next Crumb story
Yes.
is Terry. Can we talk about Terry Zwigoff just really quickly?
Of course.
So Terry Zwigoff is the director of the Crumb documentary. He was an old friend of Robert's, and Terry visited the 20th Century Fox lot where we were working on The Simpsons, and he came to visit me, and he brought Robert with him. Robert was the bait, and what he was looking for was investors in his documentary. And I talked to my friends and my business manager, and I said, "What should I invest in this thing?" And they said, "Don't invest in documentaries. They never make money. You're going to lose every penny you invest. Just know that. I mean, you can do." I go, "Well, Crumb is my god. I gotta invest." So I did, and I made my money back.
Applause.
No profit, but I made my money back. Anyway, it was really great eating lunch with Terry Zwigoff and Robert Crumb in the Fox commissary, because Crumb his head was swiveling around, sketching everybody in the commissary, and he was particularly taken by Barry Diller. He said, "Now there's an alpha male." And then my last Crumb story is I think it was the final issue of Zap, or one of the final issues, and all of the artists in Zap. It was
here. Yeah.
It was Robert Williams and Rick Griffin and Spain and
Shelton.
Gilbert Shelton. There was a collective of people S. Clay Wilson, the biggest influence.
Moscoso,
and Victor Moscoso, and they had a big party to celebrate the publishing of Zap, and they celebrated it at Heidi Ho Comics. Heidi Ho Comics. Is that the one in Santa Monica? Yes, and Crumb was quite eager to sign comic books for any cute girls.
Right.
But comics nerds, nah.
Out of luck.
He wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, afterwards, we ended up at a party at Robert Williams' house, and I witnessed, and by the way, I interviewed all of the artists for an article that will come out when I find the cassette tape. And I just got to say, my favorite interview was S. Clay Wilson, because I'll do the interview. So, S. Clay, tell me about Captain Pissgums and his pervert pirates. He was so drunk or something that he was talking gibberish. And I asked him another question. Anyway, the most remarkable thing is that you see Crumb in his comics depicting himself riding kind of piggyback on women.
Sure. Yeah.
And I actually saw him do it.
Sure.
Often.
Is Peggy DiCaprio here, or George DiCaprio? Well, Peggy DiCaprio was who he was riding. And George DiCaprio, her husband, was looking on. George is Leonardo's father. Anyway, that was truly remarkable. I go, oh my God, it's real. I thought it was a goof.
Oh, it's real, all right. Yeah.
My last Crumb story, because I know.
More?
It's like likes less.
So Robert was in town, and he came with your wife, and they did a
Talk on Genesis.
On Genesis at UCLA at Royce Hall, and then there was the Genesis comics were shown at the Hammer Museum, and I remember being there before the opening, and Robert was going down and scrutinizing the original art from the Book of Genesis. He said, quick, get a screwdriver. And he made them unscrew the glass off the wall, and he took out whatever the equivalent of whiteout is, and he whited out thing,
yeah.
and he fixed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought it was
He
amazing.
will do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it drove me nuts during the process of researching the book because he retouches all his sketchbooks as well. So for each printing of the sketchbooks, he goes into the Xeroxes because some of the sketchbooks are sold or gone, and he'll retouch them so that each printing of those sketchbooks is slightly different because he's still making corrections. And I said, Robert, you're really fucking with the historical record here. It's a real problem. He said, I don't care. That's your problem.
But actually, like when he was doing the Genesis book, I was in the office of the publisher, and somehow there was Crumb wanted certain things corrected, but they weren't willing to send the whole thing back. It was just too problematic if anything happened and so on. So we got Chris Ware to come in. He was a nervous wreck, but he did all the retouching with whiteout based on Crumb's instructions, and he's just trembling with every hand stroke that he's trying to make.
Wow.
I didn't know that, actually.
Should have asked me.
I did interview you. Robert has never mentioned that. All those interviews, never. That's really interesting. It was Chris did that. Huh.
Well, the paperback edition,
That's right.
expanded.
The Chris Ware footnote.
Oh, the one line I have to give you before I totally forget it, it belongs in this conversation somewhere, is Jay Lynch was the first underground comics artist I knew. He was 15, I was 13, so he was like an adult compared to me, but he treated me like a fellow grown-up when we were in Miami.
He was an underground cartoonist.
But later, yeah, this was
Okay.
when he was 15, so
Okay.
but we were working for fanzines together and became very close. So there's a lot of Jay Lynch stories.
Talk
but-
about what are the fanzines? Fanzines of fans of what?
Fans of humor comics like Mad.
Really?
Like I did one called Blasé. It was terrible, but I wanted more sophisticated than Mad.
And Robert did one called Foo. The mimeographed fanzines that were
And
exchanged
purple ink
by
very
mail.
often, lexicographed, before Xeroxing. But in any case, when Genesis came out, like I was a little baffled by it. It seemed like painful. Like he couldn't have been having fun. It was just so much work, and it turned out that was true. And I was talking about it with Jay, and Jay just said, "Yeah, I wish he had done the Snoid graphic novel instead."
Well, he had to isolate himself in order to get it finished. He had a series of like little hermit type.
Yeah,
cabins
he
and
would
things
go
like that.
off because he already lives in a pretty remote village, but everybody, he has an open. People come visit, and so he would at times go away for a few weeks at a time in a gîte, which was just like a remote cabin, basically. And Aileen would bring him food on the weekends, groceries for the week, and he would just work all day so he could really, really focus and get the thing done. It's an enormous undertaking.
Every begat was illustrated.
Every begat was illustrated. Every face is unique. It's a full-scale visualization of that. But it's through, what's so great about that, I love that book, and I love it partly because his inspirations, he did some serious scholarly research, particularly about the text, but then for visualizing, he was looking at, the Ten Commandments film, and he was looking at things, but he was also looking at, Sumerian reliefs. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that it does look like everything with him, he pulled together all these strands of 20th century visual culture to make this thing that looks like it could only have been done by him, but is also the book of Genesis. It's really something.
Thanks to all of you who sent in questions. First one for Dan. Biographers say the worst subjects to write about are living ones. Were you worried about this with Crumb? It's a two-part question from somebody else. How did the fact that he's alive influence you writing the book?
Well, I knew he was going to read it. So, Robert, part of the agreement, besides that I be frank about everything, was that he would fact check it. He didn't have final approval over the manuscript, but he was allowed to fact check it, which was good because he caught a lot of things. But it was mostly, it was only complicated in the sense that he's not a passive subject. As much as he wanted to be left alone and not be hounded by me too much, he also is a very intense guy. and has very strong opinions. So I could always feel the argument coming, like whether it was about interpretation or about chronology or something. And while we never really argued that much, he has a very strong presence, and when he did fact check the manuscript, he would send me back pages. Like he annotated every single page of the manuscript by hand, and so every morning for about a month, I would get these PDFs emailed to me of my manuscript with his, handwriting that I've been looking at for 40 years or whatever. And that was unbelievably intense because it was this consciousness pushing against mine, and I could sort of feel him looking at me, if that makes sense. And knowing that presence was out there, it sounds sort of hokey, but it was very real to me in my head that this guy was there. But mostly, aside from the psychic trauma, mostly it was a boon. I could ask him a million questions, and he, like Art said, he's not going to mind anything as long as it's accurate. That was the thing, and that it be fairly, that it be rigorous. So in this case, I was glad he is alive, and the only other concern was that, like with everything he's done, that he would maybe disavow it, which, it's been out a week, and there's still time. So far so good, but you never know.
One thing I wanted to get in, I guess this is the right spot, is that the book, obviously the timing he couldn't have controlled, you couldn't have controlled, but something happened, which is he's been canceled for a bunch of years, not in the art world, where the fact that he was canceled was a good thing, but in the world of people distributing his comics or talking about him with the respect he deserves without being corny about that phrase. But what was amazing was that he is presented by you while doing exactly what you said, talking about his sexual capers and his various foibles and crazy opinions on subjects that he just seemed like a nut when he was talking about some of that stuff. But in any case, what he did was, it was all covered in your book, but you somehow set it up so that it was like, not this is like some weird freak. It was more like, this is like an intrepid explorer of inner space. And that everything that he did was about looking inside himself and not flinching. So he could draw this racist stuff, he could draw all of his sexual fantasies and so on, because he wasn't going to try to stop it. He was trying to pull out it, feeling like he'd been infected by the culture that he was born into.
Yeah.
And so it was his job to investigate whatever was under every rock. And that's different than making just sex jokes or racist, creepy yucks.
Yeah.
But that helped for this moment, which is impressive, which is like from being canceled when we saw the thing that you did with him, the one event where he was there rather than dragging me into some kind of crazy situation.
That's right.
But
last week in
he was
New York,
really charming.
Yes.
And he was very good at talking about it, because he wasn't talking about a given work, like being interviewed about Genesis or
That's
whatever
right.
else. It was just him.
Yeah.
And as a result, and everybody there had paid $50 or more, right, to be there. So they all loved him. And so it was like a very different experience than everything that had been happening in the years leading up to that, where at a comics convention where they named each of the rooms where there would be lectures or conversations, the Walt Kelly room and the Jack Kirby room. When they had the Crumb room, the kids went wild. They hated it.
Right.
We won't go into that. We'll leave the convention.
I do wonder, it's a tricky subject. What was it? When I sold the book,
I just picked these up at a local comics festival. My troubles with Crumb. Is this racist? And are those nipples?
Yeah, exactly.
And,
the thing about it is, when Scribner agreed to do the book in 2019, they were really excited. He was sort of off limits to certain areas of comics, I think. But my sense, at least then and now, is that in the wider culture, it didn't ripple in that way. In kind of indie comics, he became a bad word. but I think that those, I don't know, I think that may have passed as well. I think it was sort of a generational moment.
Well, yeah, it was when everybody was more self-righteous than the person next to them.
Yeah, and also a time, the other thing is there is something to be said for sort of cyclical interest and disinterest in things, that maybe it's okay that some things drop out and then come back. I mean, I guess it gives people like me a job sometimes. But
When I asked him about it when he had that show in New York, he said, yeah, I just stopped drawing women.
he did stop drawing
Yeah.
women, actually. Yeah, except for Aileen. Yeah, I think that's basically true. Yeah.
So we've had one question.
One question.
Next,
Do
Ted,
we
what
have
else you
time for
got?
any more?
next question is for Matt and Art. Person asks, I'm curious if Crumb were here tonight, what burning question would each of you ask him?
Ooh, good question.
What you working on?
Yeah,
That's what I really want to
yeah,
know.
really, that's what I always ask everybody. What's keeping you busy? Yeah.
Yeah. Art, did you talk to Crumb a lot about work as you guys were in touch over the decades? Did you guys bat around ideas ever?
Not like that. I mean, I was too in awe of him
Even
in the San Francisco days.
in the San Francisco days, yeah.
Yeah. Then afterwards, when we'd see each other, we'd talk about it. Mostly, conversation just was more general, like things, like why are you an anti-vaxxer or something.
Right. That sort of thing, yeah.
But we did talk, and he talked. I mean, I talked to him about what I liked when I was looking at his pages, and
Yeah.
vice versa to a degree. So I was grateful for all that.
I have an Art Spiegelman story.
Oh.
So when I did, I self-published with my then girlfriend, Deborah Kaplan, Love is Hell. I decided in November of 1983 I should put out a book for Christmas. And in 1 month I had Love is Hell, which, because I used to work in a record store, I made it the size of a record album. So it's 12 inches by 12 inches. And it and the follow-up book, Work is Hell, sold a lot for a self-published book, and somehow became, I don't know if you were the person that got it to the attention of Pantheon Books, but Art was just started being published by Pantheon Books with Mouse, which Pantheon Books is a division of Random House, and it's a big deal. It was a very progressive publishing house, very political, run by a visionary named Andrei Shifrin, and they did not publish anything goofy. In fact, Mouse was probably the lightest thing they published. And you put in a word for me,
Yeah.
and that's what kicked my career off was Art Spiegelman. And then a few years later, I called Art up and I said, hey, I'm going to have an animated TV show on. He goes, I know. It's not going to happen. And I said, no. They've ordered the series we're actually making. He goes, yeah, a lot of cartoonists say that. A lot of cartoonists go to Hollywood and they think they're going to get the thing, and it never happens. I said, no, it's gonna.
But I also said you shouldn't do it because Fox was creepy.
Yes. Well, that you were right about.
Something. I just want to go on the record of having been right 1 time out of 10.
Well, anyway, one of the happy ending to this story is not only did the show take off, but Art was on the show.
That's right.
Yes, you played yourself, and you said you would never allow Mouse to be animated, but you allowed yourself to be
Well, I
animated.
didn't think of it as Mouse. I thought that was me with my avatar mask on. It's different. Like to metaphysically talk about Mouse one way or another, or carry it. Like when I did this strip recently about Gaza, I started thinking I was going to draw like caricatures of myself, and that's what Joe did for his. I did a strip where I was jamming with Joe Sacco based on conversations we were having over the phone about Gaza. And he's really knowledgeable. He knows lots of people there. He's been there many times. Did 2 books on it at least. And I just dabble. All I knew was for a while I just said I was an a-Zionist, and recent events made me an anti-Zionist, like that this was just a failed idea. And so I just knew that I had to go on record somehow with an unpopular opinion for the most part. And so the strip was made for that reason, where I just said, like, I can't afford, one of the balloons has something like, I can't afford to let Mao's become a recruiting tool for the IDF. And in there, like, I realized I have to draw myself with a mouse head, because it wasn't just about another person's opinion, it was about the way Mao's has been internalized by other people, and forcing them to understand that I didn't feel that the Holocaust was a sacrosanct area where you could never apply it to anything other than, it was the one genocide that had a copyright mark on it, you know. And obviously, these things aren't the same any more than Rwanda was the same as Gaza, but it was important for me to do that. So I had to use that mouse mask as a way of being able to talk as myself. It wasn't like pretending to be the character in the book or bringing other mice into the story, you know. So I don't know what started that defensive sentence, but something did.
Can you just talk for a moment about Mouse being the face of censored books in America?
Yeah, those 2 years were really hard for me. Well, but everybody knows this, don't they?
Well, tell the people how wrong the censors were.
It was disgusting, you know, like burning books. My God, what would be more terrible? But what happened was I get a call from, I don't watch TV news, but is there a guy named Jake Tapper?
Yes.
Yeah, so I get a call from him late
CNN.
at night.
CNN.
Okay, so I get a call late at night asking me what I think about it. I knew nothing about it. It was just breaking as a story, so I had to go and read up on it and talk to him after. But what happened after that was I had, step by step, walked into becoming a 2-year project of being interviewed all the time, going to libraries, going to universities. I even talked to a committee in Congress about book censoring over Zoom. And I just stopped drawing. Penn was around the corner. They were recruiting me for stuff. And I do feel strongly about First Amendment freedoms, so I lent myself to it. But the weird thing was that I became the poster boy of book banning. You know, like there was all these books being banned, and mine was banned for absolutely absurd reasons, like because there was a nipple showing on my mother's suicided body in a bathtub, like a little black dot seen from overhead. So they could reject the book because it was sexual. And no kid should have to read sex stuff in school. So I did this, and then I had to keep talking about how, yeah, like, I guess at that time, it's not true anymore, but a few years back, Mao's was like in schools everywhere, and it was acceptable to be exactly used the way it was, even though I didn't like it. I thought Mao's was for grown-ups and didn't think it should be taught in schools. But nevertheless, it's there, and I realized I had to talk about how, yeah, I'm being banned, but there are people who are like doing comics and books about being trans, about being black, about being minorities of one kind or another. And I understand that Mouse is about the Holocaust, or a word I don't like any more than I like graphic novels. But basically, it was a matter of pointing out that on the one hand, it was as granularly researched and real as I could make it. But on another level, it was a metaphor for othering cats and mice. And in that sense, it embraced all those other books, so I kept trying to point back to the other books while I was doing it. When it was all over, though, I couldn't draw for 1.5 years, which is why I did that thing with Joe to snap out of it.
As for Dan, can you tell us about like the first time you got access to and started looking into Crumb's archive? What was that like? How organized was it?
Oh, yeah. The first time actually was when my wife Elisa and I went to see him in the south of France, and he agreed to the book, and then I started poking around in his archive, and it's basically in his home. A lot of it is in his studio, and then in a nearby hallway and room, and it is incredibly well organized and sort of and carefully pruned. It's there's basically like file folders with spines, and on that spine is written correspondence with, and then it'll list all the people that are in that folder. And the correspondence might go back decades, or it might be just from yesterday. And then there's, financial documents and art world dealings, publishing. So he maintains it daily, that archive. So for years and years and years, he's been filing things away. Everything is printed on both sides of the sheet. and he also annotates everything. So if there might be a letter from Art or whomever, and it'll have Art's letter with Robert's notes about what Art said, and even noting, well, Art says Bill here, and so Crumb will write in Griffith, just to make sure that the reader knows. And then in his response, he'll similarly annotate his response to Art. And it's not like, okay, it's totally obsessive, but it's not as bad as it could be. And so that archive, that level of attention to detail is throughout the archive. And the key document for me, which I only tripped over in another piece of correspondence in, I think it was 2021 or 2022, way too late. In 1999, Robert decided to make a monthly accounting of his entire life up to that point. So on sheets of calendar paper, he went in each month and wrote down everything that happened from the time he was born until 99. And then he carried it forward in 2005. He neglected to tell me about that when I started the book. So I found a mention of it in a letter to someone and said, I called him up. I said, Robert, what's this accounting of your entire life that you're writing about to Carol here? And he said, oh, I should have mentioned that to you. And then indeed, there it was in a file folder, sort of, the file folders are about 2 or 3 layers deep in this armoire. So I was sort of doing it layer by layer every time I would visit. And that was buried a little further back. And in that folder, it's a recapitulation diary, which is based on this thing that Carlos Castaneda came up with. And with that calendar were all his notes for that calendar. So his source material for himself. So it'll be like sketchbook source, diary source, printed source, letters. He's gone back and researched his own life in his own archive to annotate the recapitulation diary. So the archive is very thorough, shall we say, and it was full of some really great surprises too. I found his first job offer letter from American Greetings. He kept that. I found correspondence from his first correspondence from Harvey Kurtzman in 1964. Unpublished manuscripts by friends that were enormously helpful to me. Letters from, of course, an incredible archive of his brother Charles's material, drawings, beautifully, beautifully written letters. Just everything that you can imagine. But careful, there's no receipts. There's no, usually you go into an archive and there's all sorts of crap mixed in. Postcards, whatever. This is only the material that a researcher would need for a project. There's no fat. And that researcher had been him all those years, and then it was me. And the weirdest thing I found was a few years into it, I'd sort of go back through his correspondence every time I visited to see what was new. And I came across a letter to his late son Jesse's widow, giving her permission to speak to me. And he wrote, yeah, so there's this guy Nadel, he's writing this book.
Nadel, I believe.
Nadel, that's right. And
no, that's a joke.
That's just a joke.
Mispronouncing his name.
He said there's this guy Nadel, he's writing a book. Jesse would have hated him, and but you could talk to him. I don't know if he can write, but I guess he can hustle okay. He's got a book deal. So yeah, eventually, I started seeing my own trail. It was very, very weird.
Wow.
I say?
Can I interrupt for a second? This is one of Robert Crumb's greatest pieces.
Yeah.
Is it A Brief History of America or something like that?
Yep. Short History of America.
Short History of America. 12 panels done for Coevolution Quarterly in 1979.
You bet.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I read your book. But yeah, this is absolutely amazing, and I don't know if it really reads up there on the screen, but it's just absolutely devastating about the transformation from beauty to
Squalor.
Wherever we are now.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he could do more panels now.
He did do more a little later. He did sort of added some sort of sci-fi versions. But yeah, I mean, this is a study in the formal technique of comics, really. Also, it's an incredible...
Dealing with time that way, so that
Yeah.
it's just the same scene in different decades, and it gets worse and worse. When I was looking through his stuff right before we came, I can't remember what strip it was in. Maybe it was like "It's Really Too Bad" or something like that. But he had a very brief version of this thing, like a landscape that was like a landscape, and then the squalor of Main Street.
Yeah, that's always been an obsession.
Yeah, and so that parallel between the beautiful America and what it's become was there, but this was like the master's thesis on that.
I mean, he told me he started being nostalgic for, I mean, what was really like a fantasy of an old America when he was like 8 or 9. Like he was a nostalgic kid for a time he never lived through, for the Depression era, basically. But I can kind of imagine if you're so miserable in a moment and you come across things that seem like they're from this other golden time, of course you're going to go.
You know, probably throughout American history, that's been the case. There's always been nostalgia for the previous time.
Always.
Except right now. We'll never be nostalgic for...
That's true. That is a good point. Yeah. God.
How did you deal with people's memories? You interviewed lots of people, and how did you handle it when their memory and maybe what is in the archives didn't square up?
I tried to triangulate everything as much as possible. So the good thing about Crumb is he was writing letters to friends and colleagues from the time he was about 15 years old. Letters start, and his own journals start even earlier than that. So there was a lot that was contemporaneous that I could rely on, and then I would check that against later interviews, and then, when possible, check that against the people that were there at the time. I mean, he's been in touch with his 8th grade best friend since 8th grade. So Mike remembers quite a bit and also has correspondence from Robert from like journals they passed back and forth then, and then correspondence forward. And some archives, like the Billy Ireland at Ohio State or Columbia University's archive, have correspondence from other cartoonists and publishers. So I was able to sort of construct a timeline and then either match or realize there were clashing accounts at various points, and then resolve them through sort of extra detective work or additional interviews. Robert's memory is pretty good, and his account of things is pretty reliable when it was happening. After that, kind of anything goes. But yeah, I tried to triangulate everything as much as possible. And sometimes I just had to sort of say couch it in the book as this may have happened, or it may not have if it was just a singular experience. But I was able to track down a lot of people and interviewed over 150 people. So it was about as close as I could get. There were people that I really wish I could have spoken to who had passed away already, but nothing to be done there.
Okay, quickly, I'd like to interview.
Yeah.
Can we just talk about Aileen Kaminsky
Yes,
just for a second?
of course.
What a great companion and collaborator,
Yeah,
Robert.
great artist.
Probably
yeah.
the ideal person for him and him for her. And what an amazing artist she was. And their collaborations are incredible. And when I talked to Robert I raved about her work, and he says, "Oh God, you're one of the few." He goes, "Hey, people hate her work. they hate it." And I said, "No, it's great." And one of the things about Aileen's work is the cartoonist dilemma. If you draw yourself in your cartoons, do you depict yourself better than you really look, and then when people meet you, they're very disappointed? Or do you depict yourself worse than you really look, and then when people meet you, they're pleasantly surprised? And Aileen goes much worse than you really
much
look.
worse. Yeah. I mean, Aileen's work, it's funny. I think people, I mean, you would know better than I, but it seems like in the 70s and into the 80s, it was not widely liked. It was sort of crudely drawn, but so ahead of its time and so effective in its time. It was so effective because it was this sort of other vision of feminism, essentially. It was not the uplift. It was sort of warts and all, let's deal with our bodies and let's deal with what it is to be a woman in this world, in this physical world now. And that was really, really powerful. And also just the naked autobiography of it all. It was incredibly influential on Robert. Like her, Justin Green, who was unbelievably great cartoonist, who sort of pioneered autobiographical comics, was influential on her. And then she really pushed Robert to get even more honest and more revealing and more confessional. And then together they did these incredible back and forth comics that I think sort of are just great, funny stories about married life, about any kind of romantic relationship.
You get a great glimpse of her
Yeah.
in the documentary about you.
Yeah,
It just
that's right.
was on American Masters on PBS last week. Yeah.
Last week, yeah.
Disaster is my muse. Art Spiegelman, Disaster is my muse.
Yeah,
What-
I found there's no line that I had in that the Towers book.
But anyway, Robert and Aileen over at your apartment with you and Françoise, and I want more. I want my dinner with.
Yeah, she was
Art and
great.
Françoise.
She was wonderful.
Okay, I would like to ask you guys: is there anything new that's being printed right now that, or that you've discovered, other than your wonderful biography? And for those of you who
Thanks, Matt.
who got it tonight, you're in for a treat. It is funny. It's moving. It's tragic. It's amazing. It's amazing. Anyway, is there anything that you guys are excited by that's brand new? Put you on the spot.
I like this guy, Teddy Goldenberg, that my friend Sammy turned me on to, and they're very, very funny, surreal comics by this guy, and this Israeli cartoonist, and they're very, very good. So check out him, I would say.
Well, the first, so much stuff lands on my, must be like you, like every day there's exponentially more and more comics, handmade little booklets and whatever, and it's exhausting to me. I can't follow it anymore.
So nothing.
So in a way, nothing. So when something stands out, it really stands out.
Yeah.
And for me, like the last artist that I wish we still had Raw Magazine, it was Oliver Schrauen.
Oh yeah, he's great.
He's an amazing comics artist.
Yeah.
And, he's always looks like himself, but it's also chameleon-like.
Yeah.
The first thing I saw was somehow influenced by Winsor McCay, but not the walking beds and the crazy surrealism that way. It was like the Dreams of the Rarebit Fiend, more pedestrian stuff about a boy and his father. And that was surprising. But then right after that, he does something that looks like Jesse Marsh, the only Tarzan artist I cared about.
Great Tarzan artist.
Then a long, long book about One Day, Sunday.
Sunday, which is a great book
Amazing
that came
thing.
out last year, maybe?
Yeah, I think finished it last
great
year.
book.
But boy, but everything is sort of a quest in another direction. And like I said, if we had Raw Magazine, we'd want to build an issue around it.
Well, I have, for my show and tell.
Oh, great book.
First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to not Heidi Ho Comics, they're gone. Secret Headquarters.
Oh, great
You
story.
guys know Secret Headquarters? Also,
Great story.
Skylight Books, Art Annex, fantastic place
Yeah.
for art.
Great
and
place.
Anyway, I'm really into this publisher, Sunday Press, with Peter Maresca puts these out. And this is Jimmy, the comic art of James Swinnerton.
Fabulous book.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And all the books are amazing.
Yeah.
They're all great. And they're big and chunky the way comics should be. And then my last one is Patrick McDonnell's, the guy that does Mutts, The Superhero's Journey. It's about his childhood obsession with Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and all that stuff. It's great. It's great. So if you think you know Mutts, you don't know Patrick McDonnell until you read this book. Thank you all so much.